7 headlines, one day, and every single one of them has the potential to reshape the balance of power on this planet. Today is March 20th, 2026, and what you are about to hear is not speculation or analysis of distant history. These are breaking developments unfolding right now, in real time, across multiple theaters of conflict and diplomacy. In this video, we are covering 7 major news stories. The surprise announcement of a big deal between Belarus and the United States. Iran turning the Strait of Hormuz into a private toll road charging $2 million per vessel. Trump openly considering ending the war with Iran without reopening the strait. Russia offering to stop sharing intelligence with Iran if Washington cuts off Ukraine. Cuba drawing a hard line in negotiations with the U.S., refusing to put its president on the table. Trump calling NATO allies cowards for refusing to help secure the strait, and a Russian court sentencing Ukrainian teenagers from occupied Melitopol to years in prison on terrorism charges. 7 stories, all happening today. Let us get into it. Alexander Lukashenko, the man who has held on to power in Belarus through stolen elections, brutal crackdowns, and the full backing of Vladimir Putin, just made an announcement that almost nobody saw coming. Speaking to state media on March 20th, Lukashenko revealed that preparations are underway for what he called a big deal with the United States, a sweeping agreement proposed directly in the name of Donald Trump. This came one day after Lukashenko met with John Cole, the U.S. Special Envoy to Belarus, and the Belarusian leader made no effort to hide his enthusiasm. "How could I refuse?" he said publicly, adding that he had told the Americans to inform Donald Trump that he agreed to work on this big deal. Now, Lukashenko was careful to note that the deal is not just about political prisoners, as many observers assumed. The agenda reportedly includes the functioning of the U.S. Embassy in Minsk, which has been effectively non-operational for years, and the sensitive question of nuclear materials. That last point deserves a moment of serious attention. Belarus hosts Russian tactical nuclear weapons on its territory, and any discussion involving nuclear materials between Minsk and Washington is, by definition, a conversation that reaches far beyond Belarus itself. Whether this deal materializes or becomes another piece of diplomatic theater remains to be seen, but the fact that direct contact between Washington and Lukashenko is happening at this level, at this moment, is a development that European capitals are watching with considerable unease. Now we turn to the Strait of Hormuz, and this is where things get genuinely alarming for the global economy. The Financial Times reported on March 20th that Iran is allowing a select group of vessels to use its territorial waters to cross the strait, but at a price. According to shipping industry executives, at least one operator has already paid $2 million to Tehran for safe passage, effectively transforming one of the most critical waterways on Earth into a private toll zone controlled by the Islamic Republic. At least 8 vessels, including tankers and bulk carriers from India, Pakistan, and Greece, have already executed an unusual route around Larak Island this week, with their transponder signals confirming the detour. The broader context here is staggering. Passages through the strait collapsed by 96% since the U.S.-Israel conflict with Iran began, leaving approximately 3,200 ships stranded in the Gulf. The ripple effects hit immediately. Oil prices climbed to nearly $119 per barrel on March 19th, partly driven by an attack on the Ras Laffan gas complex in Qatar that sent European gas prices surging by 30% overnight. What Tehran is doing now mirrors almost exactly what the Houthi rebels did in the Red Sea, forcing ships to essentially request permission to transit. The difference is that Iran controls a choke point through which 25% of global oil production passes. By granting passage selectively to nations with economic or diplomatic ties to the Islamic Republic, Tehran is attempting to convert its maritime position into diplomatic leverage, pulling itself out of isolation one tanker at a time. And here is where the Trump administration finds itself caught in a trap of its own making. On March 20th, Trump posted on Truth Social that the United States is very close to achieving our objectives, and that he is considering gradually winding down the military campaign against Iran, potentially without resolving the Hormuz crisis. He argued explicitly that the strait will have to be guarded and policed as needed by other nations that use it, noting that the United States does not rely on Gulf oil. Read that again carefully. Trump appears willing to declare victory, withdraw U.S. forces, and leave dozens of other countries, including major American allies, to deal with an Iranian stranglehold over the world's most important energy corridor. A U.S. official quoted by Axios pushed back, saying the war is not ending imminently and that military operations are continuing at full intensity. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt confirmed the mission was on schedule, noting that the original timeline of 4 to 6 weeks puts completion around mid-March and that tomorrow marks the end of the third week. But the real tension here is strategic. Trump cannot end this war on his terms unless the strait is open. Reopening it by force risks escalation and American casualties. Not reopening it means leaving allies and markets exposed. Sources tell Axios that Trump originally wanted the war finished before the end of March, and the Hormuz crisis has forced him to extend beyond his own deadline. Into this already volatile situation, Russia inserted a proposal that set off alarm bells across European capitals. According to two people familiar with the discussions, Russian envoy Kirill Dmitriev presented U.S. envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner in Miami last week with a stark offer. Moscow would stop sharing intelligence with Iran, including precise coordinates of American military assets in the Middle East, if Washington agreed to stop sharing intelligence about Russia with Ukraine. The United States rejected the proposal. Dmitriev called the report fake news on X, but the existence of the offer itself tells you everything you need to know about how Moscow is reading this moment. Russia has been providing Iran with satellite imagery and drone technology to help target American forces in the region, according to reporting by the Wall Street Journal, which the Kremlin also dismissed. Trump himself nodded toward this dynamic in a recent Fox News interview, acknowledging that Putin may be helping them a little. What makes this proposal particularly dangerous from a European perspective is not the proposal itself, but what it implies about the broader U.S.-Russia negotiations over Ukraine. European diplomats are increasingly alarmed that these meetings between Witkoff and Dmitriev are not producing any concrete peace process, but are instead being used by Moscow to draw Washington into a bilateral understanding that leaves Europe completely out of the equation. The intelligence sharing with Ukraine remains one of the last active pillars of American support for Kiev, and the fact that Russia is explicitly trying to trade it for something tells you how much value Moscow places on eliminating it. Meanwhile, in Havana, Cuba drew a firm line on Friday. After acknowledging last week that bilateral talks with the United States had begun, Havana's Vice Foreign Minister, Carlos Fernandez de Cosio, held a press conference to make one thing absolutely clear. Cuba's political system, and specifically the position of President Miguel Díaz-Canel, are not on the negotiating table. This came in direct response to reporting by USA Today and the New York Times, both citing multiple sources, that the Trump administration was seeking a deal that would include a golden exit for Díaz-Canel, removing him from power with 2 years left in his presidential term and 5 years remaining as Communist Party leader. The framework being described echoes what happened in Venezuela in January, when U.S. forces arrested Nicolas Maduro and installed an interim government under Delcy Rodriguez. Cuba is watching that precedent very carefully. De Cosio acknowledged that there are legitimate topics for discussion, including trade, the long-running U.S. economic embargo, and mutual compensation claims going back to the 1959 revolution. But he was unequivocal that the structure of power in Havana is not subject to American demands. Cuba is in a desperate energy crisis, made worse by a U.S. oil blockade, which gives Washington real leverage. But Havana is signaling clearly that there are limits to what pressure can achieve. While all of this unfolds in diplomatic suites and on social media, Trump's frustration with his own allies boiled over publicly on March 20th. In a post on Truth Social, he called NATO member states cowards in capital letters and added, "We will remember." The source of his fury is straightforward. Trump has been pressing NATO allies and other partners to send warships, minesweepers, and aircraft to help secure and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. The response has been almost universally negative. Britain managed to get a group of Western nations to sign a political declaration supporting the concept of such a coalition, but without any commitment to deploy forces. Trump made clear that a statement without ships is worthless to him. He noted the bitter irony of allies who refuse to share the military burden, now complaining about oil prices that are crushing their economies. There was one notable development on Friday. The United Kingdom confirmed that it is now allowing the United States to use British bases for strikes against Iran under the framework of collective self-defense of the region, including operations to degrade Iranian missile sites used to target commercial shipping. That is a meaningful shift from London. But it falls far short of what Trump is demanding, and his language toward the alliance he has always viewed with skepticism has never been more openly hostile. We end today with a story that cuts through all the geopolitical maneuvering and lands on something deeply human and deeply disturbing. A Russian military tribunal in Rostov-on-Don has sentenced 3 teenagers from the occupied Ukrainian city of Melitopol to between 7 and 8.5 years in prison on terrorism charges. Viktor Azarovsky received 8 years and 6 months. Ole Shokol received 7 years and 6 months. Denis Vasilik received 7 years. These young men were arrested in October 2023, when they were 16 or 17 years old. They were seized by masked men, transferred between detention facilities in occupied Ukraine and Russia, held for over 2 years in conditions described as brutal, subjected to beatings, torture, and psychological pressure. The trial took place behind closed doors with no access for independent observers or international organizations. They were prosecuted as Russian citizens, a designation that followed automatically from Russia's illegal annexation of Zaporizhzhia region. Viktor Azarovsky had a documented traumatic brain injury requiring psychiatric supervision and medication, which was simply discontinued. His lawyer received a call from another detainee saying Viktor was lying on his bunk staring at the ceiling, not eating. The organization Bring Kids Back UA, which tracks the deportation and detention of Ukrainian children by Russia, called the sentences a war crime, a systematic use of illegal detention, torture, and sham trials to pressure Ukrainian children in violation of international humanitarian law. This is not a side story. This is a direct continuation of what international courts have already formally investigated, and it is happening today, on the same day that world leaders are trading posts and proposals about deals, alliances, and exit strategies. 7 stories. One day, and the thread connecting all of them is the same: a world in which the rules that governed international order for decades are being rewritten, ignored, or weaponized, depending on who holds the power in any given room. Belarus is negotiating with Washington while hosting Russian nuclear weapons. Iran is charging $2 million per ship while the world's oil supply hangs in the balance. Trump is considering leaving that problem for others to solve. Russia is trading intelligence as a bargaining chip. Cuba is holding its ground under economic siege. NATO is fracturing under public insults from its most powerful member. And 3 Ukrainian teenagers sit in a Russian prison for the crime of existing in territory Moscow decided to claim. If any of this changed how you see the world today, drop a comment below. What concerns you most? Where do you think this is heading? Tell us, because these conversations matter. And we will be back with more.